Without context, this picture would be a little suspicious, but with context, it's hilarious. Basen is that true friend who would be willing to help you with anything and everything, with or without understanding the situation. And Jinshi, well, he's not really an A+ student in the subject of communication. After this moment, Maomao went back and Jinshi came back to his room as well. Now he was resting on a couch with a sad expression on his face. On the table in front of him, a cup of citrus and honey cut with hot water sat untouched. He was thirsty, but he couldn't bring himself to drink it because he didn't want it to remove the sensation that still lingered on his lips. Basen, being his attendant, was also there, and he too was going through some emotions as he seemed different from usual. His cheeks were redder than normal, not like he had suddenly gotten excellent circulation, but more like he was excited about something. Jinshi thought that it was most likely because he fought off a lion with just an iron bar, but I think it's because he has saved Lady Lishu from that lion. A little story about Basen. So Basen is Gaoshun's youngest son, and ever since his childhood, he seemed immune to pain and possesses a high level of strength. But he seemed to have some fear of women. Almost all the time, he seems uncomfortable around them, and it had something to do with his mother and his older sister, and in a way Jinshi as well. As Basen's mother was Jinshi's vet nurse and had spent all her time tending to Jinshi, so he had been looked after by his sister, who was 2 years older than him, and a serving woman. Once when Basen had been set on seeing his mother, his ability had been turned upon his sister and the serving woman. Usually they would be able to talk him down from his tantrums, but not at that time. With his child's hand, Basen had grabbed his sister's arm and had broken it. He was 6 at that time, and he had also broken off one of his fingers in the act. He was that strong at that age. On the account of that incident, Basen began to live separately from his older sister and brother, and start to see women as a fragile creature, someone who could break very easily. That's why he always kept his distance with them. Not with Maomao though, maybe because he doesn't think of her as a woman who is easily breakable. Now back in volume 5, a lion had attacked Lishu because her half-sister had tried to pull a prank on her, which clearly went too far. And if Basen and Maomao weren't there, Lishu would have become a delicious meal for that lion. And that might have been the first time when Basen had realized that his strength could also protect innocent, sweet little women like Lishu and not just harm them. That was a big part of Basen and Lishu's love story. Later he falls in love with her and she falls for him as well. And I think in volume 10, he even kind of proposed to her, but there's still more to their story, so I will leave it for the next time. Anyways, back to that scene. Jinshi's shoulders were slumped at the memory of Maomao and her not-so-willful kiss. He thought she would have been more emotional about a dog bite or a mosquito bite. As for him, she had just moved on after malfunctioning him completely. He heaved a sigh and returned to reality. I knew it, sir. You're not feeling well, are you? Basen said. If Jinshi said he was feeling fine, Basen would only press him about whether something had happened. And if he said he was indeed feeling unwell, Basen would probably take it upon himself to nourish Jinshi back to health and never leave the room. There were moments when Jinshi wished to be alone. He always wondered why Basen hadn't inherited his father, Gaoshun's intuitions for that. Because the young man could be a bit dense. As I said, Jinshi wasn't the only one who felt out of sorts that day. You look more tired than I do today, Basen. You ought to get some rest. Jinshi told him, but Basen was not going to budge. He was worried that something might have happened again or someone might try to harm his master. That's the time Jinshi really wished that he would just take a hint. He finally picked up the honey water but didn't drink it. Just let it warm in his hands. Even if he changed into his sleepwear and gone to bed, Basen probably still wouldn't have left because there was another couch in the room with a cushion that could double as a pillow if needed to be. Jinshi couldn't sleep and it seemed Basen couldn't either. Maybe it was adrenaline of fighting a large animal, or was it something else entirely? But one of the strange things about human is how they become calm when someone else is struggling worse than they are. So Jinshi let out a deep sigh. He couldn't go on like this. He needed to find a solution or an equilibrium. He called Basen. Yes, Master Jinshi, he replied, and their misunderstanding began. Have you ever succeeded in bringing someone around? He asked. Still don't know why Jinshi thought that Basen was a good choice to talk about such matters, but I guess he wasn't looking for a serious response anyways. Basen didn't need to understand exactly what Jinshi meant. He just needed to offer a yes or a no, a grunt here or there. How so, sir, you have spoken to so many people since we got here that I don't know whom you might be referring to. You don't need to finish that thought, Jinshi said. It is true that a great many women had spoken to Jinshi since he arrived in the western capital. How many, one wouldn't wish to know. I'm not in your position, sir, and I don't have much experience in such matters, Basin replied honestly. He probably never had experienced such things, at least not yet. Even though they had only seen each other a few times a year since Jinshi had entered the rare palace, they were still milk brother and trusted friends. Jinshi knew that Basin doesn't always feel comfortable around women. The more womanly, the less he liked to have anything to do with them. Jinshi got lost in his mind because the fact that Basin was able to have a more or less normal conversation with Maomao suggested that he didn't see her in those terms. Then Jinshi got conflicted as to whether that was a good thing or a bad one. While Basin spoke again by stroking his chin, I can only say I suppose it would depend on the person. There are a lot of people I don't feel entirely comfortable around, but the situation has something to do with it too. How confident and competent the other person is can affect the flow, and vice versa. And you have to deal with so many people at once, Master Jinshi. Isn't it a strain? He was trying so hard to give his insight and be a little help to Jinshi, but his thoughts were not aligning with him at all, who was in fact still thinking about Xiaomao. So many at once? You're overestimating me. Jinshi hadn't expected quite such a direct answer. Obviously he wasn't talking about that, but Jinshi smiled mockingly, oh, to hear himself be described as someone who is crazed with lust. I think Jinshi was the one who wasn't thinking straight here because he kept on making stories in his own head. I mean, Basin had been going through Pleasure District in Gaoshun's place a lot lately, but he had been too shy to even talk to anyone other than Maomao and had flown away anytime someone, namely Pyren, had appeared in front of him. But Jinshi was thinking that maybe he had managed to gain some experience somehow, as Jinshi knew what a cunning saleswoman the madam of the brothel could be. So he looked at Basin conflicted and swallowed heavily before asking Basin if something had happened at the Verdigrease house. Basin was obviously startled by his sudden question, and Basin was a bad liar, quite frankly, but that aspect of his personality was exactly what allowed Jinshi to relax around him. Nothing happened, Basin insisted, and anyways, I can rise to the occasion when I needed to. Raise to the occasion? A somewhat unsettling choice of word, but yes, Basin could indeed do what he needed to do when he had to do it, Jinshi thought. Again, I'm pretty sure Basin was thinking of an attack or something dangerous. What bring this on, Master Jinshi? Did something happen with you? He asked. No, it's simply that there's someone I would very much like to triumph over, Jinshi said, although he had to struggle to get the words out. He went on, I'd gotten the idea that I knew how to play this game. This someone can be rather elegant, but in practice, and I'm supposed to be the superior. And perhaps I trusted too much to that. That illusion was truly shattered tonight, and it left me feeling quite pathetic. He might not always have a great deal of confidence, but he'd at least had some. He couldn't count how many women had come to him in his 6 years in the Rare Palace, and it had given him the belief that he could make them dance in his palm. But obviously the one he was playing that game with was Maomao, who was in fact better than him and would do anything but let herself be controlled by him. Now Basin was looking at him with hint of amusement. This person must be quite skilled, sir, to make you say that. Yes, at least Basin didn't realize who Jinshi was talking about, thankfully. We fought over something minor, he said. I started the fight and I lost it. Basin looked puzzled for a second, but then it looked like it made sense to him. You lost, sir. Ah, so that's what you mean, a sparring partner. Sir, what bore they must be. Yeah, forget about being on a different pages. Now they both were on completely different books. Jinshi thought again that Basin could be perspective at the most surprising moments. Perhaps it would sound insulting to suggest that Jinshi was startled to realize Basin even knew what it meant to be rivals in love. So there was someone at the banquet who could even make you admit defeat, Master Jinshi, Basin said quietly, looking profoundly thoughtful. Don't flatter me, please. I'm aware that I'm still young. My opponent is like a willow tree, or like trying to shove a curtain. No matter how much I push or strike, they simply roll with it. To him, the question was what his inexperienced self should do. The only thing that would help would be to gain some of that experience, he supposed. But how? He couldn't go about romancing another woman, but neither did it seem wise to head for the brothel, simply because there supposedly wouldn't be any consequences. I like how loyal Jinshi wanted to be, but man, I feel bad for Basin, because it was then that Basin had said something quite unexpected. Can I be of help in any way? And Jinshi had nearly dropped his water. I'm sorry, he said. He knew for a fact that Basin was straight, so he thought, how could he say that? And yet Basin went on, I must confess, I'm not very capable and I'm too aware that you're far more skilled than I am, Master Jinshi, but I ventured this suggestion in the belief that it must be better than simply mopping around and doing nothing. Jinshi began to say something, but his malfunctioning mind thought that Basin was right, and that if he practiced with Basin, well, on some level, it wouldn't count, would it? He thought, but Jinshi did feel like something was off there. Before he could actually think about it with his head, Basin said, skill I may lack, but I'm confident in my stamina, how much I can endure. Talking about his fighting skills. Stamina? I really don't think. Jinshi's mind went in error. This wasn't a conversation he could continue. Maybe Basin had been taught some twisted game at the Verdigree's house. Jinshi continued with his own story and wondered if he should report this to Gaoshon. Basin, though, was looking at Jinshi completely serious. He seemed excited, but not in an overheated way he had earlier. Just think of it as a practice, sir. Nothing more. I may not be the person you have in mind, but just pretend. Jinshi took in the idea and then jumped into action. He put the water on the table, rose from the couch, and slowly come and stood in front of Basin. Shall we move somewhere, sir? It's a bit cramped here, Basin suggested. No, this space is enough, Jinshi replied. Basin was almost 2 suns shorter than him, and Jinshi wished Basin would shrink another 7 just so he could reach Maomao's height. Then Jinshi leaned in and Basin backed away. What was it? He acted so much like the very person Jinshi was imagining. Master Jinshi, he called. It's alright, that's perfect, he said, and Basin pointed out that he was empty-handed. And Jinshi replied with, so am I. He's still so out of reach from reality because he was thinking that Basin probably have learned something from that pleasure district, but he thought that maybe he shouldn't mention it to Gaoshun. Confirming his own story in his mind, he thought that there was no more reason for him to hesitate. But each time Jinshi got closer, Basin opened up space again. Not like Maomao used to do, but like that of a trained soldier. Master Jinshi, he called again. This person never initiates, but only responds to what is done. He said, even more lost than he was before. So Master Jinshi, I should... Basin looked at Jinshi deeply concerned. His back was already against the wall. Jinshi had succeeded at that before. It could almost be called his speciality. With Basin all but cornered, Jinshi planted his hand firmly against the wall. Master Jinshi? Basin stuttered, maybe because he got the idea of what was going on. But Jinshi shushed him up and focused on his imagination. He was picturing not his milk brother, but the person he wished to beat. He had to strike before the mouth spoke. The mouth that was usually so articulate but grew voluble and clever at the oddest times. He took Basin's chin with his free hand and pressed his thumb to his lips, while Basin had gone completely white, and from this distance, Jinshi could even see him covered in sweat. Why was he so worried? This was his suggestion, Jinshi thought, but somehow Basin almost looked as if he hadn't expected any of this to happen. Could there be some mistake here, some crucial misunderstandings? Jinshi finally got some brain cell back. Perhaps it was the tension both of them were feeling, because neither of them noticed the sound of voices right outside their door. And just as Jinshi was about to put the pieces together, the door of the room flew open with a bang. It's been too long since we shared a drink, and I've got the most fascinating curry in my net, announced a gentle neutral voice. Lady Adua? Cried a guard outside, but the lovely person in men's clothing was already pushing past him in the room. The odor of alcohol came in with her. She seemed to have been sharing a drink with herself before she thought to invite Jinshi. Maybe she was a little drunk at that time, that's why she had forced herself in. And the moment she had chosen to enter was indeed a very, very awkward one. Jinshi was almost on top of Basin, who was pinned against the wall, with Jinshi's finger brushing his lips in what was unmistakably a lover's caress. Basin was sweating and his face was completely bloodless. The 2 guards who had come in trying to restrain Adua covered their eyes with their hand and peeked out between their fingers. As for Adua, her eyes went wide and her mouth dropped open. Ah, she said, that's right. You don't have to choose a flower. I guess I was mistaken. With that said, she backed out of the room and politely shut the door. Neither Jinshi nor Basin said anything, but after the moment of silence, the darkened manor was filled with the sound of 2 men shouting at each other. First of all, I would say the translator did an amazing job with these scenes. And secondly, it's these scenes like these that make me so sure that Jinshi lacked communication skills. and that he sometimes only worked on a single brain cell that could be named Maomao. And it's not just this time he had lost his brain cells because of her, but also back in volume 4, when Maomao got kidnapped, he also lost his charmful cells and straight up scared the shit out of Lulan's ladies in waiting. So it's clear that he malfunctioned when he is Maomao deficient and when he gets a high dose of her as well. So that was the Basin and Jinshi scene from the prologue of Light Novel 6, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for listening to me. Take care of yourself and goodbye.
I don't really wanna hurt you, but I can't control the pain. If you're sticking by my side, maybe we could be okay. Okay, maybe you could be the change.